My father-in-law tapped his wineglass 3 times, and the whole dining room went quiet. 42 people at that Thanksgiving table. 42 people who watched him point across the centerpiece arrangement at my 11-year-old daughter and say she would receive nothing. Not someday. Not conditionally. Nothing. Ever. Because she was not, and I will never forget his exact words, a true Harrington. Sophie sat next to me in the burgundy dress she had picked out herself, the one with the small white buttons she had practiced fastening all week, because she wanted to look grown up. She was holding her fork when he said it. She set it down very carefully on the edge of her plate, the way children do when they are trying not to show that something just broke inside them. She did not cry. She stared at her sweet potato casserole and became very still. I did not say anything right away. I smiled at my father-in-law the way you smile when you are waiting for the right moment, and I thought about the envelope in my bag on the coat rack in the hallway. I thought about the lawyer who had called me 3 weeks earlier. I thought about what my late husband had quietly built before the accident took him 18 months ago. I should explain how we got there. Daniel and I had been married for 9 years when he died. A truck ran a red light on a Tuesday morning in February, and by Thursday afternoon I was a widow with an 11-year-old and a mortgage and a box of his things from his car. His family had never fully accepted me. I was a middle school art teacher from Ohio. They were the Harringtons of Greenwich, Connecticut. 3 generations of commercial real estate, a family name on 2 buildings downtown, and a self-mythology so polished it had its own internal logic. I had never fit the mold, and Sophie, who had Daniel's kind eyes and my stubborn chin and absolutely no interest in impressing anyone, had never fitted either. My brother-in-law and his wife were different. They wore the Harrington name like a uniform. Their son Tyler was 13, already being groomed for whatever version of legacy his grandparents had decided he represented. He was a smart kid. I want to be clear about that. Tyler was genuinely bright and had done nothing wrong except be born into a family that needed a golden child the way some families need a scapegoat. Sophie was the scapegoat. It had started small. Comments about her grades that stopped just short of cruelty. Questions at holidays about whether she was in any clubs, any teams, anything impressive, with the slight exhale when she said she liked drawing and building things from kits. My mother-in-law once told Sophie that her father had been exceptional at everything at her age, which was not even true, and which was delivered in a tone that made the subtext unmistakable. My father-in-law rarely spoke to Sophie directly. He looked past her the way people look past furniture that was placed in an inconvenient spot. After Daniel died, it got worse. I had expected grief to soften people. Instead, it seemed to clarify things. My father-in-law began referring to the family business in terms that made clear I was a guest in a story, not a character. He suggested, twice, that Sophie might be happier at a different school. A school farther away, he meant. I understood. The Thanksgiving invitation had surprised me. We had spent the previous Thanksgiving at my mother's house in Columbus, and I had thought, quietly, that this new arrangement might become permanent. But my mother-in-law called in October and asked us to come. Her voice was warm. She said Sophie should be with family. I told myself I was being paranoid. I was not paranoid enough. The drive to Greenwich took 3.5 hours. Sophie slept most of the way, her head against the window, her breath fogging the glass in small circles. She woke up when we pulled through the gate and looked at the house the way she always did, like she was trying to figure out what it wanted from her. "Do we have to stay the whole time?" she asked. "Just through dessert," I said. "We eat, we see everyone, we drive home." She nodded, but kept looking at the house. Inside, the Harrington home smelled like cinnamon and money, and a specific kind of performance that had been rehearsed so many times it no longer felt like performance to the people inside it. My mother-in-law greeted me with a kiss near my cheek and said Sophie looked lovely, which was the warmest thing she had said to either of us in months, and which I now understand was deliberate. My father-in-law shook my hand and said it was good to have me there, which was the kind of sentence that technically means nothing. My brother-in-law and his wife arrived 30 minutes later with Tyler. The room reorganized itself around them. My father-in-law lit up. My mother-in-law rushed over. Tyler was asked about his debate tournament, his tennis ranking, his model UN position, in the way you ask questions when the answers are trophies to display. He answered everything politely and looked slightly uncomfortable with the attention, which I noted and filed away. Sophie found a corner near the bookshelf and started looking at the spines. I watched Tyler glance at her twice. He did not approach. His mother's hand on his shoulder kept him pointed in the other direction. Dinner was fine until it was not. The food was good. The conversation moved around the table in the patterns it always moved: family mythology and business updates, and the particular kind of nostalgia that rewrites the past into something more flattering. I talked to Daniel's aunt, who sat near me, and asked how we were managing. I said we were okay. She squeezed my arm and said Daniel would be proud. My father-in-law stood up after the main course while people were still eating. He said he wanted to share something before dessert because he did not want to wait. He had been thinking, he said, about legacy, about what the Harrington name meant, and who carried it forward. He smiled the smile of a man who had practiced this speech. He spoke for several minutes about the family business, about the properties they owned, and the work that had gone into building something real over 3 generations. He talked about responsibility and stewardship, and choosing the right people to carry things forward. Then he said that he and my mother-in-law had decided to formalize their intentions. "Tyler," he said, "come stand up here with us." My brother-in-law beamed. His wife straightened in her chair. Tyler stood up, clearly rehearsed, and walked to where my father-in-law was standing at the head of the table. "The business," my father-in-law said, "will pass to Tyler. The investment portfolio, the Greenwich property, the holdings we have built, all of it, will go to him when the time comes. He is the future of this family. He is the one who understands what the Harrington name requires." People applauded. My mother-in-law dabbed her eyes, which was theatrical because she did not look sad. Then my father-in-law looked down the table at Sophie. Sophie had gone still the way she had gone still in the car outside the house, like she was bracing. "As for Daniel's daughter," my father-in-law said, and the way he said Daniel's daughter instead of my granddaughter was its own sentence, "we have made no provisions. The Harrington legacy requires commitment to this family and to what it stands for. And frankly," he said, with the tone of someone delivering a reasonable conclusion, "I have my doubts, long-standing doubts, about where Sophie's real loyalties are, about whether she is truly." He paused and looked at me, a Harrington at all. The table went quiet in the specific way tables go quiet when something has been said that cannot be unsaid. Sophie did not look up from her plate. I want to be accurate about what he was implying. He was suggesting, in front of 42 people, that Sophie might not be Daniel's biological daughter. He had been hinting at this for over a year. To relatives, to family, friends, never directly and always, with just enough plausibility that it made people uncertain. He had planted seeds. This was the harvest. I looked at my daughter. Her hands were flat on the tablecloth now. She was 11 years old and she was learning, in real time, what adults do when they decide you are worthless. I thought about an envelope. 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, I had received a call from a lawyer named Mr. Harmon. He had represented Daniel's grandmother, Grandma Ruth, who had passed away 4 years earlier at the age of 81. He said there were matters related to her estate that had been scheduled to be addressed at a specific time, and that time was now. He asked me to come to his office. He said to bring Sophie if I wanted to. I had gone alone. I had sat in his office while he explained that Grandma Ruth had created an educational and support trust for Sophie 9 years earlier, shortly after Sophie was born. Daniel had been involved in setting it up. The trust was funded, legally clean, and specifically designed so that no member of the Harrington family except Daniel could contest or access it. There were conditions attached, and there was a second document, sealed, that Grandma Ruth had instructed Mr. Harmon to give to me if, and she had been very specific about the if the Harrington family ever publicly questioned Sophie's legitimacy or right to be part of the family. I had held that sealed envelope in his office, and he had asked if I wanted to open it then. I said I would wait. Sitting at that Thanksgiving table, I understood why Grandma Ruth had built in the waiting. She had known her son. She had known exactly what kind of man he was, and exactly how he operated, and exactly when he would finally say the quiet thing out loud. She had been dead for 4 years, and she was still protecting my daughter from across that distance. I reached for my bag. My mother-in-law saw me stand up. Her expression flickered. She opened her mouth. I smiled at her and walked to the head of the table. My father-in-law looked at me the way he had always looked at me, with the particular patience of someone who does not take you seriously enough to feel threatened. He thought I was going to try to argue. He was not worried. I set the folder on the table. 7 years ago, I said, Daniel went to a doctor with Sophie. She was 4. He wanted a DNA test because he knew someone in this family was going to raise exactly this question someday, and he wanted documentation to exist that could not be argued with. I opened the folder. I turned it so the table could see. Sophie is Daniel's biological daughter. Confirmed. Notarized. Filed with Daniel's attorney, with a copy held by Grandma Ruth's estate. Daniel loved this family, but he understood it. He prepared for this. The room was very still. There is more, I said. Grandma Ruth created a trust for Sophie in the year she was born. The trust currently holds $420,000 in a combination of invested assets and a property in Vermont that Grandma Ruth owned separately from the family portfolio. She funded it quietly over many years. She told no one except Daniel and her attorney because she knew what would happen if my father-in-law found out. My father-in-law's face had shifted from patience to something harder. His jaw was tight. I pulled out the second envelope, the sealed one. Grandma Ruth also left this, I said, specific instructions for this document. She said to open it if this family ever publicly questioned whether Sophie belonged here. I opened it about 2 weeks ago when I got the call from Mr. Harmon. I have had it for 3 weeks. I was waiting. Die. I unfolded the letter. Grandma Ruth's handwriting was careful and slightly shaky, the handwriting of someone who had taken her time. I read the relevant section aloud. She had written that she had watched her son use the family name as a weapon for 30 years. That she had seen him push out anyone who did not perform usefulness, including her daughter Diane, who had been quietly cut from the family business in 2009 after she had disagreed with my father-in-law about a property deal. That she had watched Daniel struggle to protect the people he loved from a man who turned everything into a hierarchy. That she had decided, before she died, to make sure at least one person could not be erased. That person was Sophie. My father-in-law pushed back from his chair. "This is a stunt," he said. Henry was managing her assets at the end. She did not have the capacity. Grandma Ruth had her attorney present when she signed every document, I said. She had a physician sign a capacity evaluation at the same appointment. 3 witnesses. Notarized. She knew someone would say exactly what you just said. She prepared for that too. Across the table, I saw Daniel's aunt put her hand over her mouth. My father-in-law walked toward me. He was trying to take the folder. I stepped back. "This is not a conversation," I said. "This is a notification." He stopped. "Sophie," I said. She had not moved from her chair. She was watching me with an expression I could not fully read from across the table. Something between afraid and something else. Something newer. "I am done explaining to this family why you deserve to be here. You do not need their permission to exist. You never did." My mother-in-law said my name once, softly. She did not follow it with anything. I picked up my bag. I took Sophie's coat from the coat rack. I held her hand as we walked through the front door, and the last thing I saw before the door closed was Tyler standing at the edge of the dining room, looking not like a winner, but like someone who had just watched something happen that he did not know how to process. We drove in silence for 20 minutes before Sophie spoke. "Was that real?" she asked. "The money, the trust." "Yes," I said. "Grandma Ruth set it up when I was born. When you were born, because she loved you before you knew you needed someone too." Sophie looked out the window. The highway lights swept past in orange intervals. "Did Dad know she did that?" "He helped her do it." She was quiet for another few minutes. Then she said, very softly, "He knew they were going to do something like that. He knew who his father was," I said. "He just did not want to believe it would ever be this bad, so he made sure it did not matter if it was." My phone had started buzzing before we hit the state line. My father-in-law called twice. My mother-in-law left a voicemail that was mostly crying and which ended with the phrase, "You have destroyed this family," delivered in the tone of someone who believed the sentence was true. My brother-in-law texted 3 words, "We need to talk." I did not respond to any of them that night. I called Mr. Harmon instead and told him what had happened. He said he had been expecting the call. He said we should meet the following week. He said that Grandma Ruth had also left a third set of documents that he had not yet shared with me. Documents she had described as the part that protects you if he decides to fight. He is going to fight, I said. He always does, Mr. Harmon said. That is why she prepared 3 layers. My father-in-law contacted a lawyer of his own within 48 hours. I knew because my brother-in-law called me not to threaten, which surprised me, but to warn. He sounded tired. He said their father was talking about contesting Grandma Ruth's capacity, about claiming the trust had been set up under undue influence, about questioning Daniel's DNA test on procedural grounds. He said Vanessa was pushing him to stay out of it, but he could not stay out of it. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because Daniel was my brother, he said. And because Tyler asked me last night why Grandpa had said what he said about Sophie, I did not have a good answer. I have been thinking about that all day. I will handle your father, I said. But I need to know you are not going to be used against Sophie. I am not, he said. I promise you that. I took his word tentatively and kept Mr. Harmon close. The third set of documents was in a safety deposit box at a bank in Stamford. Mr. Harmon had a copy of the key. We went together, and Daniel's Aunt Diane came with us because Mr. Harmon had asked her to, and because she had known for 20 years what was in that box. Aunt Diane had been removed from the Harrington family business in 2009. The official story was that she had chosen to step back. The real story, which she had never told publicly, was that my father-in-law had caught her reviewing the company financials and finding discrepancies. He had threatened her. She had signed a non-disclosure agreement in exchange for a cash settlement that was significantly less than what the discrepancies suggested she was owed. She had moved to Philadelphia. She had stayed quiet because she had believed she had no choice. Grandma Ruth had known. Inside the safety deposit box were copies of the original financial records Aunt Diane had found, accounting documents that showed my father-in-law had redirected a portion of the company's revenue into a separate account over a period of 8 years. The total was not small. Grandma Ruth had obtained copies quietly through a contact at the company's former accounting firm, a woman who had been troubled by what she had seen and who had made 1 copy before she left the job. She had given it to Grandma Ruth. Grandma Ruth had never used it. She had kept it as what she called in her notes to Mr. Harmon a last resort, only to be used if he comes after the girl. He had come after the girl. There was also a personal letter in the box, written to Aunt Diane, that Grandma Ruth had sealed with her name on the front. Mr. Harmon handed it to her in the bank's small private room. She opened it carefully. She read it without speaking. When she finished, she folded it and held it against her chest for a moment with her eyes closed. She knew, Aunt Diane said quietly. All those years, she knew what he had done to me. She was waiting for the right time to make it matter, Mr. Harmon said. The letter contained Grandma Ruth's account of what she had witnessed. It named dates, named amounts, named the secondary account. It was handwritten and witnessed by a notary. Combined with the accounting documents, it constituted the kind of evidence that did not require a courtroom to be effective. It only required the right audience. My father-in-law had hired an attorney who specialized in estate disputes. I know because his attorney sent a letter to Mr. Harmon within a week of Thanksgiving, challenging the validity of the trust on the grounds that Grandma Ruth had lacked testamentary capacity, that I had exercised undue influence over an elderly woman, and that the DNA documentation had been manufactured. The letter was aggressive and specific, and designed to make the process expensive and slow. Mr. Harmon drafted the response. He sent it by certified mail and email simultaneously. It outlined, in very precise language, the capacity documentation, the witnesses, the physician evaluation, the notarization. It noted that any attempt to challenge the trust would trigger a specific clause Grandma Ruth had included, under which a challenger who lost forfeited any right to other assets from her estate, including several investment accounts that had not yet been publicly disclosed. It noted that we had additional documentation related to the Harrington family business that had not yet been shared with relevant parties, but which could be made available to those parties at a future date if circumstances required it. The letter did not threaten, it explained. It said, "Here is what is true. Here is what will happen if you proceed. And here is what has been prepared that you did not know about. My father-in-law received it on a Tuesday. His attorney called Mr. Harmon on Thursday. The language had changed. The call was about finding common ground, about resolution, about what a family dispute of this nature does to everyone involved. Mr. Harmon was pleasant on that call. He said that we were also interested in resolution. He outlined our terms. The trust would be acknowledged as valid with no contest. Any and all questions about Sophie's paternity would be retracted, in writing, and my father-in-law would correct the record with every family member and acquaintance he had told otherwise. There would be no further contact with Sophie outside of events where I was present and had consented to the contact, and there would be a written apology, to Sophie specifically, for what had been said at Thanksgiving. My father-in-law agreed to everything within 4 days. I do not think it was remorse. I think it was calculation. He had looked at what we had and decided that fighting was more expensive than surrendering, and that was fine. I had not been hoping for remorse. I had been hoping for Sophie to be left alone. The apology letter arrived on a Thursday afternoon. It was formal and slightly cold, and had clearly been drafted by a lawyer, which was fine. Sophie read it at the kitchen table. She read it twice. Then she set it down and said, "He still does not actually think he was wrong." "I know," I said. "But he knows he can't do anything anymore. That is what matters, yes." She thought about this for a moment. Then she went back to the circuit board kit she had been working on, which was in pieces on the other half of the table, and said she was going to figure out why the third LED was not lighting up. I watched her work for a while. She had Daniel's focus, that specific stillness that came over him when he was figuring something out. She would not have known that about herself. She had been too young when he died to have a library of memories to compare against. But I knew it, and knowing it was a complicated kind of comfort. A few weeks after the letters were exchanged, my brother-in-law called again. He asked if he could bring Tyler over. Not for any formal reason, he said. Just to see Sophie. He thought it might be good for both of them. I said yes, cautiously. They came on a Saturday afternoon. Tyler was quieter than I expected, which I had noticed at Thanksgiving too, that quality of someone carrying something heavy and not knowing where to set it down. Sophie was working on a model airplane in the basement when they arrived. My brother-in-law sat in the kitchen while I made coffee and watched his son disappear down the stairs. They were down there for 2 hours. When they came up, Tyler had grease from the airplane model on his sleeve, and Sophie was explaining something about wingspan ratios with her hands. Tyler was listening, and his listening looked real, not polite. My brother-in-law watched his son from across the kitchen. His face had something in it I did not have words for yet. He left 20 minutes later, and at the door he said to me, in a voice just above a whisper, "I knew what my father was doing to Sophie. I told myself it was not my business. That was wrong. I am sorry it took me this long." I nodded. I did not tell him it was okay, because it was not entirely okay. But I believed he meant it. Tyler started coming over most Saturdays after that. He and Sophie did not have a dramatic friendship origin story. They just started being in the same space, and the space got more comfortable. And eventually he was texting her links to engineering videos, and she was texting him back with opinions about them. They were cousins who had been kept separate by adults who needed them to be separate. And once the separation was removed, they turned out to actually like each other. Sophie never brought up Thanksgiving unprompted. But one evening in February, when we were making dinner and the radio was on and the kitchen felt normal in a way that had been rare for the previous 18 months, she said, "Mom, do you think Dad knew it would end up okay?" I thought about Daniel. I thought about the careful work he and Grandma Ruth had done together, building something specifically designed to protect someone who did not yet know she would need it. I thought about the way he had known his family and loved them anyway, and prepared for the worst of them anyway, because love and clarity are not the same thing, and you can hold both. He hoped it would, I said. So he made sure he did everything he could to help it get there. Sophie stirred the pasta for a moment. "He was really smart," she said. "He really was." She looked at me sideways. "You are pretty smart too." "I know," I said, and she laughed the laugh she had inherited from him, sudden and unguarded, and it filled the kitchen the way that laugh had always filled whatever room it was in. Here is what I learned. I learned that cruelty dressed up as family planning is still cruelty. That a man who publicly questions whether his 11-year-old granddaughter belongs at the table is not managing legacy. He is managing his need to decide who matters and who does not, and he has been doing it so long he no longer notices the wreckage. I learned that the people who prepare for you matter as much as the people who show up in the moment. Grandma Ruth had never seen a single confrontation. She had died 4 years before any of this happened, but she had sat with her lawyer, in clear mind and full intention, and built something specifically designed to protect my daughter from her own son. That kind of foresight is a form of love I did not have a word for until I needed it. I learned that golden children suffer differently, but they still suffer. Tyler had panic attacks before tournaments. He could not name a single thing he actually liked doing that had not been pre-approved. He was being shaped into a symbol, and symbols do not get to be people. He did not choose that. He was chosen for it. That distinction matters. I learned that my husband had known exactly who his family was and had loved them with open eyes. He had not been naive. He had just also believed in preparing. He had believed that the people he loved deserved to be safe even after he was gone to keep them safe himself, and he had done what he could to make that true. Sophie is 12 now. She placed second in a regional engineering competition for her age group last spring. She is building something with Tyler on weekends, some project involving reclaimed wood and small motors that I do not fully understand but which apparently requires significant negotiation between them about the correct approach. My mother-in-law calls occasionally. The calls are awkward and careful, and we are working through them slowly, two people trying to figure out what we owe each other and what we do not. My father-in-law and I do not speak. That is an agreement we reached without saying it out loud, and it is the right one. The trust is active and managed. Sophie does not think about it much, which is probably how it should be. It is there the way a foundation is there, not visible in the day-to-day but holding everything up. I think about Grandma Ruth more than I expected to. I think about a woman in her 70s sitting with her attorney, writing out the conditions, the clauses, the protections, thinking through every scenario her son might try. She had done it because she could see clearly what other people in that family had trained themselves not to see, and because she had decided that seeing clearly required you to act, not just know. She had been right. There is a photo of her in my living room now. Sophie asked if we could put it there. In it, Grandma Ruth is standing in a garden somewhere, laughing at something off-camera, not posed. She looks like someone who tells the truth easily and without apology. Sophie stops in front of it sometimes when she passes through the room. She does not always say anything. Sometimes she just looks at it for a second, acknowledging something, and then keeps walking. I know that feeling. It is the feeling of knowing someone believed in you before you knew you needed it. It is not a small feeling. It holds you up on the days when nothing else does. If you have someone in your family who makes you feel like you are the wrong kind of person, too quiet, too different, not impressive enough, not worth the table setting they gave everyone else, I want you to hear this. They are wrong. They are measuring something real against a standard they invented, and the standard was always designed to exclude you. That is not a reflection of your value. It is a reflection of their need. And if you are the one watching a child shrink at a family table, deciding whether to speak or keep the peace is not free. Someone is paying for it. Make sure you know who. Drop a comment and tell me what you think. Tell me if this story brought up something from your own family. Tell me if you were the one who was left out or the one who finally stood up. Every one of those stories matters, and I want to hear yours. This is Revenge by Facts. Subscribe and hit the bell so you do not miss what comes next. Because there are more stories like this one, stories about families that tried to erase someone, and the people who made sure they could not. I will see you there.